Okay. Please don't forget to turn your cameras on. Okay, thank you so much. So remember, today we're going to practice what we did yesterday, which is basically task number 4, the speaking section, right? Let's talk a little bit, let's summarize what this was about. So we said task number 4 was first of all similar to task 3, but the difference is that in task number 4, everything you have to do is just listen to a lecture, right? So you will just have to listen to this lecture where the professor will be talking about one academic topic that you'll have to summarize later. Remember that in the lecture, the structure is always the same. So in this lecture, you will always have 2 subtopics and 2 examples. So whatever the topic is from the lecture, you will always have 2 subtopics. It's always going to be divided into 2. And each subtopic will contain its own example, right? That was the structure. You have an introduction first, the first subtopic, example, second subtopic, and example. And we said that this was the template that we were going to use. So it's pretty much a simple template. The only thing that I want you guys to remember is to use some transitions, to use transitions to separate each element. So you need to use a transition to separate the subtopic with the example, to separate the first subtopic with the second. That's the only thing, right? In the introduction, you copy and paste what you have in the lecture. So you said the lecture discusses and you use what you have in the question. Make it as fast as you can and go directly into explaining the body of the lecture, right? Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions before we start? No questions? Okay. So let's start by practicing. We're going to try to do as many questions as we can. Let's start with this one here. Okay, so I'm going to play the lecture. You can take notes.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class. The professor is discussing advertising strategies.
In advertising, various strategies are used to persuade people to buy products. In order to sell more products, advertisers will often try to make us believe that a product will meet our needs or desires perfectly, even if it's not true. The strategies they use can be subtle, friendly forms of persuasion that are sometimes hard to recognize. In a lot of ads, repetition is a key strategy. Research shows that repeated exposure to a message, even something meaningless or untrue, is enough to make people accept it or see it in a positive light. You've all seen the car commercials on TV, like the one that refers to its roomy cars over and over again. You know which one I mean. This guy is driving around and he keeps stopping to pick up different people. He picks up 3 or 4 people, and each time the narrator says, "Plenty of room for friends, plenty of room for family, plenty of room for everybody." The same message is repeated several times in the course of the commercial. Now the car actually looks kind of small. It's not a very big car at all, but you get the sense that it's pretty spacious. You'd think that the viewer would reach the logical conclusion that the slogan misrepresents the product. Instead, what usually happens is that when the statement "plenty of room" is repeated often enough, people are actually convinced it's true. Another strategy they use is to get a celebrity to advertise a product. It turns out that we're more likely to accept an advertising claim made by somebody famous, a person we admire and find appealing. We tend to think they're trustworthy. So you might have a car commercial that features a well-known race car driver. Now, it may not be a very fast car. It could even be an inexpensive vehicle with a low performance rating. But if a popular race car driver is shown driving it and saying, "I like my cars fast," then people will believe the car is impressive for its speed.
Okay, so the question says, using the examples from the talk, explain how persuasive strategies are used in advertising. You will now have 20 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, so could we maybe start with you, Sole? Okay?
Teacher, I don't listen clearly.
You couldn't listen to the lecture?
Yes, but I have a problem with my pen. So,
Oh, you didn't take notes.
yes.
Okay, you'll go next time, don't worry.
Yeah.
What about you, Mateo? Yes, next time you'll try. Can you do it, Mateo? Yes. All right, I got a text. It says, okay. Anyone would like to try? Would anyone want to try?
I would like to try, teacher.
Great, Ricardo, thank you. So please go ahead.
Well, the lecture discusses how strategies are used to persuade customers through repetitive exposition to a message, and due to this message, how people can reach to accept the product. First, the professor explains that a small car can be featured, but through the advertisement, it can make believe the customers that is plenty of room for many people, like family members and friends. And the second example is it's about getting a celebrity. For example, a well-known celebrity can drive a race car, and then the celebrity says that this car is fast enough, then people will accept it.
Okay, Ricardo, great, thank you. So, okay, so you got the ideas, you got the main ideas from the lecture. The only thing is I want you to remember the structure. Remember that you'll have the topic. So what is going to be the topic? What you have in the question, right? So in your introduction, you spend too much time in the introduction. It was like 24 seconds that you spent there. What it, right? So in your introduction, what you have to do is use what you have here. You're going to tell me the lecture discusses how persuasive strategies are used in advertising. And that's it. That's your entire introduction. Now, because in your introduction, you said the lecture discusses how strategies are used to persuade people through repetition. But repetition is only one of the strategies mentioned, right? You have two strategies that you will always have to subtopics. So the topic strategies. The subtopics was the first one, repetition, and the second one, having a celebrity advertised, right? As you said. So careful with the structure. Now the examples are different too. So it should have been the lecture discusses persuasive strategies. First, the professor explains that repetition is one of them. For instance, if you want to advertise a car, even if it's not that big, but you're constantly repeating that it's a big car in the commercial, then consumers will believe it. right? Then she goes on to explain that having a celebrity advertise the product could be another strategy. To illustrate, she gives the example of, I don't know, I think it was a racer advertising a racing car. So they can, people are more like celebrity sets, right? So that should be structured. That's the only thing I'm going to tell you. Careful with that structure. Use what you have in the question for your intro and separate the two subtopics like that. Is that okay?
Okay, teacher.
Do you guys have any questions before we continue? Okay. So let's start. Let's take a look at this one here.
Now listen to part of a talk in an education class.
One of the hardest parts of teaching is keeping your students' attention. Now, the key to doing this is active attention. Basically, there are two types of attention. The first type is active. Active attention is voluntary. It's when you intentionally make yourself focus on something. And since it requires effort, it's hard to keep up for a long time. Okay, so let's say you're teaching a biology class, and today's topic is frogs. All right, you're standing at the front of the room and lecturing. A frog is a type of animal known as an amphibian. Well, this isn't necessarily going to keep the students' interest, but most of them will force themselves to pay active attention to your lecture. But it's only a matter of time before they get distracted. Now, the other type of attention is passive attention, when it's involuntary. Passive attention requires no effort because it happens naturally. If something's really interesting, students don't have to force themselves to pay attention to it. They do it without even thinking about it. So, back to our biology lecture. You start talking about frogs, and then you pull a live frog out of your briefcase. You're describing it while you hold it up. Show the students how long its legs are and how they're used for jumping, for example. Then maybe you even let the frog jump around a bit on the desk or the floor. In this case, by doing something unexpected, something more engaging, you can tap into their passive attention, and it can last much longer than active attention. As long as the frog's still there, your students will be interested.
Okay, now the question says, using points and examples from the talk, explain the difference between active and passive attention. You will now have 20 seconds to prepare your response. Okay, so does anyone want to go next? Maybe Sole? Can you try now?
Can I?
Sure, Manuel. Why not? Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the professor's talk in this explanation is talking about the keeping attention. There is two kinds of attentions: active and passive. The active is voluntary and is keeping. For example, the ballet is talking. The frog is an animal. That. And in the passive attention is involuntary, is more natural for the person. And in the case with the frogs, is how the frogs use their legs to jump, and that. the teacher.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Manuel.
Okay.
So, okay, so I see you had your response. You got the two main ideas. I mean, you got the main idea too. So the only thing I suggest is at least in the beginning, I'm not telling you forever, but at least in the beginning, try to use the template. That's going to help you remember the structure because you're not using the template and like you're spending more time in the introduction. I cannot really see clearly where one idea ends and when the other one begins, when active attention ends and passive attention begins. So it's gonna help you to use it. Try to spend 10 seconds. And in order to do that, you say the lecture discusses or the lecture talks about if you want, and you copy what you say you have here, right? The difference between active and passive attention. Use transitions too. Transitions are great for vocabulary and connections. So tell me first, and then go with the first topic, right? First, the professor explains passive attention, which is, or active attention, which is voluntarily when people are forcing themselves to pay attention. For instance, the professor gives the example of a frog lecture, where the professor or the teacher is just explaining what a frog is. The frog is an amphibian, and so on. The students are not really paying attention because they are genuinely interested, but because they're for one. You say, then she goes on to explain passive attention, and you give the example. So try to use the template. That'll be the only thing I'm gonna say. Okay, the only tip I'll give you. Use the template, it'll help you structure better your response. And then after a few tasks that you complete, you won't need it anymore. Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions so far? All right. So this one here. I'm gonna play the lecture. Please take notes and listen.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
We all know that insects like to eat plants, but some plants have been able to develop ways to protect themselves from insects. Today I'm going to talk about some ways plants defend themselves. Now, some plants have physical features that prevent insects from landing on them, like the passion plant, for example. Its leaves have little spiky hairs all over them. They're like spikes sticking out of the plant that are so numerous and dense that they prevent insects from landing on the leaves. Basically, there's just no room for the insect to land. And since insects can't land on the leaves, they can't eat them. So the little hairs serve as a physical feature that helps protect the passion plant from insects. All right. But other plants protect themselves using chemical defenses, like the potato plant. The potato plant's able to release a chemical throughout its leaf system whenever an insect attacks it, starts eating the leaf. So, say an insect starts eating a potato plant's leaf. That will cause the plant to react by releasing a chemical throughout its leaf system. The insect swallows this chemical as it eats. And this chemical discourages the insect from wanting to eat any more of the plant. How? Well, the substance makes the insect feel full, like it's already had enough to eat. The insect no longer feels hungry, so it stops eating the plant. So, by emitting this chemical, the potato plant protects itself from insects.
Okay. All right, the question says, using points from the lecture, explain how the passion plant and the potato plant defend themselves from insects. Right, the topic here will be just how plants defend themselves from insects, right? So now you will have 20 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So who wants to go now?
Can I try, teacher?
Who was that? Mateo, yeah, sure. Okay, go ahead, please.
The lecture discusses how plants protect themselves from insects. First, the professor explains a physical defense in which she uses the passion plant as an example. The passion plant counts with spiky hairs in the leaves, which that helps that prevents insects from landing in the leaves so they can't eat them. Then she goes on chemical defenses in which she uses the potato plant as an example. The potato plant releases some kind of chemicals when an insect starts eating the plant, and it discourages it from the attack.
Okay, great. It discourages the insect from wanting to eat more, right? They feel full already. Perfect, though. Mateo, that was great. Congratulations. I really loved your response. I wouldn't change any of it. I think it was really well done. It was well structured. You managed your time perfectly fine. It was exactly 25 seconds for each subtopic, 10 for your introduction. Both subtopics were correct. So body features and chemical defenses, right? And both examples were well explained. And personally, I like the fact that you didn't explain too much about the subtopics. You just mentioned what those were. And you use the example, really, as the question says, you use the example to explain that subtopic. So great. Maybe some comments, and this is maybe for grammar. I'm noticing, and I like the way you're saying, the professor explains chemical defenses in which she uses this as an example. Instead of saying in which, you can try to say where. So the professor explains chemical defenses where she uses the potato plant as an example. Okay, that'd be the only detail maybe. And be careful with the template too. Second part is she goes on to explain, right? Don't forget. But that'd be the only two details, and they're like really small details. Well done, Mateo. Thank you. Okay, guys. Any questions before we continue? Okay, guys, now I want to do something different. So, okay, first let's do this one here. Where is it? Okay, let's take a look.
Why do we do the things we do? What drives us to participate in certain activities, to buy a certain car, or even to choose a certain career? In other words, what motivates us to do what we do? Well, in studies of motivation, psychologists distinguish between two very different types. Our reasons for doing something, our motivations, can be extrinsic. In other words, based on some kind of external reward, like praise or money. Or they can be intrinsic, meaning we engage in the activity because it pleases us internally. Both create strong forces that lead us to behave in certain ways. However, intrinsic motivation is generally considered to be more long-lasting than the other. As I said, extrinsic motivation is external. It's the desire to behave in a certain way in order to obtain some kind of external reward. A child, for example, who regularly does small jobs around the house, does them not because she enjoys taking out the garbage or doing the dishes, but because she knows if she does these things, she'll be given a small amount of money for doing them. But how motivated would the child be to continue doing the work if her parents suddenly stopped giving her money for it? With intrinsic or internal motivation, we want to do something because we enjoy it or get a sense of accomplishment from it. Most people who are internally motivated get pleasure from the activity, so they just feel good about doing it. For example, I go to the gym several times a week. I don't go because I'm training for a marathon or anything. I just enjoy it. I have more energy after I exercise, and I know it's good for my health, so it makes me feel good about myself. And that's what's kept me going there for the past 5 years.
Okay. Now the question says, using points and examples from the talk, explain the two types of motivation. Okay. You will now have 20 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, so who wants to go now?
Me, teacher.
Great, Alejandro. So please, you can start. Yeah.
The lecture discusses two types of motivation and answer the question why we do what we do. First, the professor explained intrinsic motivation that is externally. For instance, she talked about a child who go out with the garbage because their parents given money for it. Then she goes on to explain about intrinsic motivation that is internally, and you make that because you get a pleasure of doing something. For example, go to the gym because it's good for health and you enjoy it.
Exactly, great. So remember, like that second example, it wasn't in general going to the gym, right? It was her example, her own experience. So I could say, for instance, she talks about herself, right? She goes to the gym and she enjoys it. She gets a sense of pleasure from it and whatever, right? So try to be more precise. Other than that, it was a great response, Alejandra. Congratulations. I like that thing that you added, that question you added in your introduction. It wasn't an obstacle in terms of time. You still got time to explain both the topics and both examples. And they were well explained too. A short definition for each. The examples were good. Careful always with the grammar part, with the conjugation of the verbs, right? A child goes, child takes the garbage because they are expecting to get money. That'd be the only thing, but it was great, Alejandra, well done. Okay. Any questions now? Sure, so now let's do something that's not psychology, biology. Well, it is in a way, but we're gonna see. All right, let's listen to this one here.
Listen to a part of a lecture from a history class. The professor is talking about the Industrial Revolution.
Back in the 18th century, in a time known as the Industrial Revolution, some countries, well, England in particular, started using new technology, like steam-powered machines, to produce goods. And the use of these machines brought about some significant changes. Let's go over two main changes that occurred. One change was that the center of production moved from homes to factories. Let's take fabric or cloth as an example. Historically, for a very long time, people had made cloth by hand in their homes, earning a little money from their home-based cloth production. But then these new steam-powered machines for weaving cloth were invented and placed in factories, and these machines could weave cloth much more quickly and efficiently. So there wasn't any reason to keep making cloth slowly in homes when it could be made faster on factory machines. Thus, the majority of cloth production shifted from home-based businesses to factory production. Another result of the new technology is that cities started forming around factories. Like, let's say there was a cloth factory that was built in a certain small village. Now, of course, the factory needed workers to operate the machines used in cloth production. So the factory would hire a lot of rural workers who would then move from the countryside to the village. So instead of being spread out all over the countryside, the workers started to congregate in the village with the factory. As a result, the village got bigger and eventually grew into a city.
Okay. Now, using points and examples from the talk, describe two changes that occurred after machines began to be used for manufacturing goods. Right? So two changes that occurred after machines began to be used for manufacturing goods. So now you will have 20 seconds to prepare your response. Okay, so is there anyone who wants to try now? Preferably somebody who hasn't gone yet. Only 1/3, one of you two guys.
Can I try, teacher?
Okay, yeah, sure, Valentina.
Okay.
Please, you may start.
Okay, the lecture discusses two changes after the Industrial Revolution. First, the professor explains that the center of production moved from homes to fabric because people used to produce things by their hands. And when they started to use machines, the production was more quickly like clothes. And then she goes on to explain that cities started forming around factories because workers moved to those villages to work on those factories. And that's why cities started forming around these factories.
Great, well done. So nice. You use the template correctly. You had a short introduction. You use what you have in the question. Both subtopics were correct, and I like the fact that you didn't change anything from what the professor said. So say the center of production moved from homes to factories, right? Remember factories and fabrics, different thing. Factories. The second one was good too. So cities started to form around factories, and you explain why in both cases. And honestly, I mean, normally I would say, well, maybe you talked too much about this subtopic and you didn't explain too much the example. But in this case, I wouldn't say that because you did mention that it was the example was about code production, and that was enough because I think it was almost self-explanatory, the example. Maybe, yes, you could have talked a little bit more about the example, or maybe instead of explaining, because the question says, using points and examples, describe the two changes. So maybe, like you explained, right? So because workers needed to work in the factories, so they moved from the countryside to the villages, and eventually cities started to form around the factories. That's a great explanation. but maybe you can try to relate it to the example and say, so for example, in the case of the clothing factory, workers from this factory needed to move from the countryside to the villages, and eventually their families moved too, and they've created a city, right? So I'm trying to relate it more to the example. I don't know if you know what I mean. Yeah. Okay, that'd be the only thing, but it was great, Valentina. Well done. Okay, guys. Is that okay? Do you have any questions so far? Great. So let's do something else. All right, here.
Listen to part of a lecture in an economics class.
So when we talk about the demand for a product, we're referring to how much consumers want to buy it, right? And often the demand for a product is influenced by its price. The more expensive it becomes, the less chance that people will want to buy it. Okay, but that's not the whole story. Sometimes the demand for a product can also be influenced by the price of other related products. First, there are those products called substitute goods. If products can be substituted for one another, then they're called substitute goods. They're similar enough to be interchangeable. And an increase in the price of one means an increase in the demand for the other, like butter and margarine. They're pretty much used for the same purposes. Margarine's a butter substitute, and you can bake equally well with either. Well, when the price of butter goes up, it becomes less affordable, and so what do people do? They buy margarine instead, right? So, you see, an increase in the price of butter increases the demand for margarine. Now, another instance where the price of one product can influence the demand of another is when you have two products that can't be used without each other. Those products we call complement goods. They complement or complete each other, if you will, like compact discs and compact disc players. You need both products in order to use either. So if the price of either product increases, demand for both is likely to decrease. And if the price of CDs goes up, well, demand for them will go down, right? And because CDs and CD players complement each other, what will also happen is that the demand for CD players will go down too.
Okay, the question is, using points and examples from the talk, explain how substitute goods and complement goods influence demand for a particular product. We'll now have 20 seconds to prepare your response. Okay. So who wants to try now? Who wants to go?
Let me try again.
Okay, so please, you can go ahead.
Okay. The lecture discussed about the how substitute goods and complement goods influence on the demand of a particular product. First, the professor explained the price, which how this influence on the demand of different products. For example, in the margarine and the butter. When the margarine is the price is higher, they have less chance to be buy instead the butter, and vice versa. And then she goes to explain about the complements, like she talked about how these two products makes a good, like a combo. And she gave the example of the CD and CD player.
Okay, good. And yes, that's a good summary for the example in case you're running out of time. So great. What could I say? I mean, your introduction was better now. You use what you have in the question. And well, both subtopics were fine. I see that you got both ideas, but in the first one you mentioned price, right? You said first, that's about price. But the first topic was substitute goods, right? The second was good, you mentioned complement goods. So this one was honestly a little bit longer, or I don't know if I was the only one that felt that way. But you were able to summarize the idea as well. So the only thing I'd say is maybe try to always look at the clock as you go. There are some things that maybe you won't be able to say, but it's important to balance your time. So you see, if you're running out of time to have the example, then you can try to summarize it the way you did for the second, but do the same in the first. We don't spend too much time in the first, and then you don't have enough in the second. So that's the only tip I'll give you, but this time that you use the template, it's correctly used, the structure was great. So just make sure that you look at the clock cost. Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions? Okay. So
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Birds have some of the best vision capabilities in the animal kingdom. Some bird species have vision that is 8 to 10 times greater than humans. Overall, a bird's eyes are extremely important for its survival. One aspect of birds' eyes that plays a role in helping them survive, in other words, to find food or to avoid predators, is the position of the eyes in the skull. Some birds have eyes that face forward on the skull, kind of similar to how humans' eyes are positioned. Forward-facing eyes allow a bird to clearly see and judge distances because it can focus on objects with both of its eyes and correctly perceive height, width, and depth. One type of bird with eyes positioned in the front of the skull is the hawk. Hawks eat animals like mice. Hawks have such good eyesight that they can spot a tiny mouse in a field from high up in the air. They spot the mouse and swoop down to catch it. Without such good eyesight, they would not be able to spot or catch their food. Other birds have eyes that are located on each side of the skull. This positioning of the eyes can help a bird to avoid predators. Instead of just seeing what's directly in front, they can see things that are on either side, permitting them to watch for danger in all directions. Imagine a duck wading near the edge of a lake. It needs to spend time eating grasses and insects, but it also is on constant lookout for danger from its predator, like the fox. An eye on each side of the duck's head allows it to see a fox approaching from either side. If it spots a fox, it can then fly away to safety. The placement of the eyes are critical in helping the duck avoid predators.
all right, the question says, using the examples in the lecture, explain how the position of bird's eyes is critical to their survival. We'll now have 20 seconds to prepare your response. Okay, guys, so please, who wants to go? Anyone?
I would like to try, teacher.
Great, Ricardo. Please go ahead.
The lecture discusses that birds' vision in animal realm is relevant for their survival. First, the professor explains that for the position of the eyes in the skull, hawks are able to eat animals. For example, they can catch a mouse. Then she goes on to explain that other animals, in opposition to the hawk, they might not catch a mouse, but they have in each side of but the side of the skull helps them to avoid predators and look out all directions. They can protect themselves from other predators like the fox, for example.
Okay, Ricardo, well done. So nice. I think you got both ideas. I mean, the topic was how the position of the eyes helps them survive, right? Now, the first, I think that you're still struggling a little bit less, but you're still struggling with the structure, right? When you have biology, you will always have two subtopics. I mean, not only when you have biology, but in this case, the subtopics are never going to be the animals that are mentioned. The animals are going to be the examples. So in the first one, for example, you talked about the hawk directly, but the hawk was the example. The first subtopic was, do you remember what it was?
Not very much. I think it was related to birds, but as predators.
Yeah, exactly. So it was about, I mean, the subtopics were two different types of positioning of the eyes. The first one was the animals that have the eyes located on the front of the skull, so facing forward. And the example was the hawk. And the second subtopic was the animals that have the eyes located on each side, right, as you described. That was good. And the example was the duck. So each position helps them in a different way. When they have the eyes facing forward, that helps them catch their prey, as you said. So the hawk, for example, can catch mouse, right? Mouse. And same thing for the other one, right? The eyes that are located on each side helps them to look out for danger and avoid predators. As you mentioned, the second one was great. And the duck, because of the position of their eyes, can avoid being caught by the fox. So that was it. And try to structure it that way. So that's the only comment. It's just a matter of practicing enough so that you understand the structure for each type of question. But in this case, biology will always be the same. You have two subtopics, which are two adaptations, two types, two ways in which the animals do something. And the examples will always be the animals. All right?
Right. Thanks, teacher.
Any questions before we move on? Okay, so let's take a look at this one.
Now listen to part of a talk in a psychology class.
Okay, ever thought about the things that happen to you and what's responsible for them? We psychologists have a term, locus of control. Locus of control refers to where people think control over their lives comes from, whether it comes from themselves or from somewhere else. People who think that control is in themselves are internals, and people who think it comes from somewhere else are externals. Let's say there are two people going for job interviews. One of them is an internal. She has an internal locus of control. Since she thinks that control comes from within herself, she'll believe that her success and her preparation are really her responsibility. So she's likely to really work on her interview skills ahead of time. Then, if she gets the job, she'll believe that it's because she's worked so hard. And if she doesn't get it, well, she'll probably be disappointed with herself and try to figure out how she can improve for the next time. Okay. And another job candidate is an external. He perceives other things, say his interviewers, to have more influence. After all, it's their decision. It depends on what mood they're in and, luck. Now, with his external locus of control, he's not as hard on himself, so he's more likely to take risks. He might interview for a job that he's not completely qualified for, and if he gets it, he'll think he's really lucky, and because he believes external forces are in control, he might think it's because the interviewers were having a good day. And if he doesn't get it, he'll probably blame the interviewers, or bad luck, rather than look at himself and try to figure out what he could have done better.
Okay, guys, so this question says, using points and examples from the talk, explain internal and external locus of control. You'll now have 20 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, who wants to try? Anyone? All right. Is there anyone who wants to go?
Me, teacher.
Okay. Brilliant. Then please start now.
The lecture discusses internal and external locus of control. Explains about the thing, what happened, and what you do about it. First, the professor explains internal, that people control themselves. For instance, she gives the example of interview that a person no I can't. Internal, external, I know, no, I can't.
Okay, don't worry anyhow. It happens to all of us. So what happened? Why did you get stuck?
Because I don't prepare the ideas.
You didn't prepare during those 20 seconds?
I have the resume, but I don't prepare the ideas, so I get lost.
Okay, don't worry, it's fine. But in that case, if that were ever, if that were ever to happen, then you still need to go on, right? And I like that you were trying. You were trying not to get stuck and to continue with your response. That's what you have to do. And if it's really if nothing goes out, if you don't remember anything, then go with a conclusion or something. But at the end goal, at the end of the day, is to show that you can speak, right? So try to do so. Okay, no problem. One thing I wanted to say about this one, I don't know if you guys noticed, but the way that the professor structured the lecture was different than the typical way we've seen so far. Did you notice any difference in the structure here? This lecture. I don't know if you guys noticed, but the two subtopics were explained at first, and then the two examples, and they went together, right? So it wasn't like first subtopic example, second subtopic example. In this case, it was the two subtopics explained, and then the two examples all together. So you can do that as well. I mean, there's no reason why you can do that. So if you think that it's gonna help you save time, because the two examples had the same context, right? It was about two people that were going into the same interview. So you can do something like that in your response. You can say, the professor or the lecturer discusses locus of control. First, the professor explains that internal locus of control is when people believe that control comes within themselves, so they can control what happens to them and they're responsible for their actions. However, external locus of control is this and that. So I'm explaining first the two types, and then you can mention the example, right? The professor gives the example of two people that are going into an interview. The internal one will believe this. On the other hand, the external one will believe that. That is another way you can structure it, no problem, especially if that is the way that the professor is structured, because that's maybe going to help you save some time. So that's just an idea. Okay, obviously you can still follow a usual structure, no problem. It's still, I mean, it still applies to this type of lectures because you still have two subtopics and two examples, which is what matters. Okay. Is that okay? Do you guys have any questions now before we go? Everything clear? All clear? Okay, guys. So please, today we have to fill out two surveys. I'm sending you guys the first one to be on your screens. And as soon as you guys are done with this one, I'll be sending the other one out. So please don't go yet. There are two that we have to do. Okay. Guys, thank you. I'm sending the other one now. Yeah. That's the last one. We're done with that. Then you can leave. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great night.
Bye, teacher.
Bye, teacher. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, teacher. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.